The stability of Vladimir Putin's regime hangs by a single thread, and that thread has a name: Ramzan Kadyrov. Kadyrov isn't just a regional boss, he's the linchpin of Putin's personal security. Now, remember, Chechnya is the only region inside of the Russian Federation that has brought Moscow to its knees before. If instability breaks out there, Vladimir Putin doesn't just face a war that he cannot control, he loses the very forces that he relies on to suppress rebellion at home. And right now, the unthinkable is happening. Ramzan Kadyrov is apparently in the hospital with critical kidney failure. That power vacuum was dangerous enough. But then the news broke on January 16th, and now that timeline has accelerated. I'm Dr. Jason Smart, Kyiv Post Special Correspondent and National Security Advisor. Subscribe now and consider becoming a channel member if you want the latest on what is really transpiring globally. Thank you. So Radio Free Europe reports that Kadyrov's heir apparent, Adam Kadyrov, is in serious condition following a mysterious car crash in Chechnya's capital of Grozny. Now, a dying ruler and a targeted heir? That is how warlord systems shatter. In a clan-based society like Chechnya's, loyalty evaporates when the line of succession blurs. Moscow now faces a binary choice: to pay the exorbitant price for obedience or send the federal troops and risk a third Chechen war. The Kremlin in the past few days has been silent, and that already is saying quite a bit. Now, for years, many people mocked the Kadyrovites, the soldiers of Kadyrov, as TikTok soldiers, the soldiers who make videos of so-called combat while they never actually show up to battle. But that missed the point. Vladimir Putin doesn't keep the Chechens around so that they can fight inside of Ukraine. He has them there, close to Moscow, so that they can protect his regime. They are there to fight Russians. They are his Praetorian Guard, outsiders paid to protect the emperor within the city limits. Russian conscripts might hesitate to fire on their own people, but Vladimir Putin, he bets that the Chechens will have no problems firing on Russians during an attempted coup. But if Grozny ignites, those guards, they won't stick around Moscow. They will snap back to the Caucasus to defend their own clans and their own territory. A guard that runs home leaves the emperor naked, and we are approaching a turning point that could very well shatter the Russian Federation. So understanding Chechnya is the key to understanding why a single car crash sends tremors through the Kremlin. Chechnya is not just a region. It is in fact a distinct nation held captive within the Russian Federation. Most Chechens are Muslim, possessing a separate language, identity, and a centuries-long proud history of resisting Russian control. The geography there is rough. It's mostly mountainous, and that acts as a fortress against foreign invasion. Located about 1,500 kilometers or 930 miles south of Moscow, it has fought for freedom for centuries. However, Ramzan Kadyrov has ruled there since 2007, a power that was granted to him only because he betrayed his own people, switched sides, and backed Moscow against those who sought independence. Now, history shows why Moscow is terrified. Back in 1994, during the First Chechen War, there was an expectation it would be a quick Russian victory. However, in 1996, it ended with total humiliation for Russia. Despite throwing major ground forces at the fight, Russia failed to hold the country, and the cost for that was staggering. Voice of America estimates that about 8,000 Russian troops were killed or injured. About 50,000 Russian troops were wounded. Now, Russia burned through its best units without achieving any of its goals. And when Moscow returned in 1999, they swapped that strategy for a new one: pure brutality. Following the 1999 apartment bombings, in which then FSB Director Vladimir Putin blamed on the Chechens, though quite obviously it was not the Chechens, it was Putin himself who did it to increase his popularity before the next elections. But I digress. The gloves came off, and the Kremlin decided to begin this new war with Chechnya. Siege warfare and heavy bombardment became the only way to win. And by 2003, the United Nations designated Grozny the most destroyed city on earth. Those are the stakes today. We see that Chechnya is a regime trigger because we see that it cannot be pacified. It must be obliterated if you wish to take it. But a repeat of this sort of a war is simply impossible for Russia today. The war in Ukraine has consumed the military bandwidth that Putin would need for a third Chechen war. And that is why the succession plan was so critical. The Kremlin had treated the rise of Adam Kadyrov as being inevitable. Kadyrov's entire life had been choreographed. He was supposed to be the crown prince, that he would surely take over. He won prestigious awards, such as the Hero of the Chechen Republic. He got that for beating up a prisoner who had allegedly blasphemed Islam. From there, his life just kept getting better. In April 2025, Ramzan, his father, appointed his son Adam to become the secretary of Chechnya's Security Council. We saw later on that his own brother, Akhmat, became the deputy prime minister of Chechnya. But this is all sent a message. This was being done to show that the Kadyrov clan owns the Chechen state. But when the air falls, the system begins to crack. With Adam critically injured, the vacuum is real. Ukraine-backed independence figures like Ahmed Zakayev are watching carefully. They know that if the Kadyrov family looks mortal, the momentum begins to shift. And if Chechnya reopens as a front, Moscow has no reserves left to stop it. Now, succession chaos isn't a tragedy for everyone. In fact, there are many groups who would gain from it. For instance, rival Chechen factions who smell blood. They understand that if they are able to take control, that means they will get command of budgets, appointments, and armed formations, which then allows you to run protection rackets and skim subsidies. But there's also the Kremlin security managers. They would win from this as well. Moscow has always preferred a weak boss who depends on the center over a strong dynast who bargains as an equal. A weakened heir makes Chechnya easier to manage. It's easier to do with both leverage and replacement. But then there's also the excluded patronage networks that are also ready to make a move. If Adam's rise squeezed contracts and immunity into a smaller circle, the men left out wouldn't just wait around politely. They would strike the moment that the top looked unstable. But make no mistake, a new fight in Chechnya is beyond Vladimir Putin's capacities today. The 1990s proved that Chechnya cannot be pacified by normal policing. It requires massive force and catastrophic destruction to impose control. Ukraine has already drained the troops, the equipment, the money, and the internal security necessary for that sort of an operation. A second internal front would demand fresh units and constant reinforcements. Vladimir Putin would have to pull internal troops like Rosgvardia, the Russian National Guard, which is under his friend Viktor Zolotov, his former bodyguard. They would have to come from places like the occupied territories in order to assist with the emergency containment. But that creates a double danger. A reassignment weakens Russia's grip on the occupied Ukrainian territories. But Rosgvardia also matters in Moscow. They're necessary there because they're the ones to prop up the regime if there's problems back home. Without them, the regime is in jeopardy. So, considering how weak the Putin regime is right now, that's why you too should help the Ukrainian soldiers get more life-saving drones and other supplies. Please check out the first pinned comment below with the question of the day. Right below it, you'll see how you too can help defeat Russia. Thank you. What we are seeing right now is the very definition of overstretch. You cannot fight a war both of conquest and a war of suppression simultaneously. The war in Ukraine is the drain that makes every internal shock more dangerous. British linked reporting has described how there's a horrific 27-1 kill ratio near Kupiansk. Loss ratios like that burn through trained manpower faster than replacements can be prepared. The rear, we see, is also vulnerable. In fact, the Kyiv Post reports that the resistance group Atesh claimed sabotage of an electrical substation near Bryansk. Internal groups inside of Russia are seeking to overthrow the Putin regime. It shows you how very weak the center has become. But the timing could not be worse for Moscow. War burns cash, and Chechnya is nothing else but a cash problem. The Kadyrov alignment with Moscow is not ideological. It is transactional. Investigations have shown that roughly 94% of Chechnya's expenditures are subsidized directly by Moscow. So if that money stream tightens, the contract between them begins to weaken. And financial pressure is spiking because loyalty payments always rise during instability. Kommersant reports that China halted electricity imports from Russia starting on January 1st over pricing disputes. Beijing is already signaling it will not subsidize Moscow's war economy. And this is forcing the Kremlin to choose: fund the war or fund Chechen loyalty. Now, revenue pressure means tighter subsidies, and purchase loyalty does not function on credit. As the cash dries up, we see that the Kremlin is forced to use fear as its main tool. But fear is itself a double-edged sword. It can suppress dissent, but it also breeds resistance. Rising repression makes loyalty brittle, and brittle loyalty is what detonates succession crises. And that is why the Chechen elites right now are making their own calculations. Can Moscow still guarantee the Kadyrov contract? Simultaneously, the Kremlin elites are calculating if Vladimir Putin still has a reliable guard to protect his throne. Doubt about the guard makes the elite's betrayal very believable, quite thinkable. And betrayal becomes possible when fear no longer looks permanent. And today, everyone sees Vladimir Putin has a finite capacity to fight on multiple fronts. Overstretch is why foreign partners fall away and internal threats begin to multiply. But the threat isn't just internal to Chechnya, it is the blast radius that follows a collapse. We must remember that the North Caucasus are a powder keg where the fuse has already been lit. Look at Dagestan and Ingushetia. In late 2023, we saw massive riots there at the airport in Mekhchala. Police were helpless for hours, but it wasn't just a riot, it was a stress test. It was a test of whether or not the federal authorities had control of the regions. And what we saw was that Moscow failed the test. Now, if the Kadyrov regime in Chechnya fractures, that instability will spill over the borders that are already bleeding. Ramzan Kadyrov has spent years aggressively seizing land from the neighboring Republic of Ingushetia. This created deep-seated hatreds that are waiting for a moment of weakness to be settled by force. Furthermore, the nature of the next war will be fundamentally different from the 1990s. In the 1990s, the Chechens fought with grit and captured Soviet weapons. However, today, the Chechen diaspora, it's fighting inside of Ukraine, on the side of Ukraine against Russia. Battalions like the Sheikh Mansour and Jokhar Dudayev battalions are mastering modern drone warfare, encrypted communications, and NATO standard tactics. If these veterans returned home to fight for independence during a succession crisis, they won't just be fighting with AK-47s. They will be bringing the very same FPV drones and tactics that they learned on the battlefields of Donbass in fighting Russia. Moscow's internal security forces, the Rosgvardia, are equipped for riot control, not for defending against swarms of kamikaze drones piloted by combat veterans. And this is the nightmare scenario the Kremlin fears most: a technological leap in insurgency warfare occurring exactly when their Russian army has been hollowed out. The barrier between a frozen conflict and a raging fire is thinner than anyone in the West seems to realize. One option is to keep feeding the Ukraine war and accept higher internal risk. The other is to pull inward and save the regime, conceding operational space inside of Ukraine. But either move, it signals weakness to rivals inside of the Russian Federation, and weakness invites new tests from every other restive region. Vladimir Putin's house of cards is trembling, and now a storm is building. There is a lot going on now, and things are about to get dicey. Make sure you check out this video, and you'll understand why. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.